Hi, this is John Zogby, and this is another edition of our podcast, The Zogby Report, real and unscripted. As always, I'm here with my son, Jeremy. Hey, Jer.
Hey, Dad. Good morning.
Hi. We just completed a poll, a national poll, and we had a couple of questions that you put in there about a Black Swan event,
Mm.
possibly in 2024. And what I wanted to do was kick things off a little bit about what a Black Swan event is or could be, and how the American voters are responding to it. So, a Black Swan event is, essentially an unexpected uh, event that has the potential to turn our world upside down. A major event, the economy, a major war, a stock market crash, but something catastrophic that wasn't really expected. Now, we have a situation where an overwhelming majority, I'll get into the numbers in a minute, overwhelming majority of American voters say it's very or somewhat likely that there'll be a Black Swan event in 2024. And I just want to go back a little bit historically. We've had them before, and we have survived. Uh, in the past century, certainly the stock market collapse of 1929. And the interesting thing is that there was probably no better man folks thought of to have as president of the United States than Herbert Hoover. He was a compassionate engineer. He'd been in charge of the World Food Program, relief and hunger program after World War One. He was ideal as a compassionate, competent person, but he ran out of juice. And things only got worse and worse and worse until 1932, ultimately culminating in under Hoover, the Bonus Boys March, when World War One veterans who were not getting their promised pension marched on Washington, and Hoover called out federal troops and shot and killed a number of those troops under the leadership, incidentally, of a couple of young colonels in the U.S. Army by the name of Eisenhower and MacArthur. But with that said, we don't have a real Black Swan event again until Jimmy Carter. History is getting better on Jimmy Carter, but Jimmy Carter facing not only the Iran hostage crisis, but stagflation. And at one point, a year before the election, he asked his entire cabinet to resign, went off into a retreat to regroup, and then, following the lead of his pollster, Pat Caddell, gave a famous speech. Instead of rallying the American people who were really in a funk, he said, "There's a malaise in the country. We're all suffering from this malaise." And his numbers plummeted. It was Ronald Reagan, just like Franklin Roosevelt, who generated confidence and spirit. We're probably in another one of those moments right now, even with the economy improving. We're at a point where Joe Biden, who had been seen as a compassionate, competent, know his way around Washington, especially after the turmoil of the Trump years, has just seemed to have lost it. As the economic numbers get better, his numbers get worse. A Pew poll just out a couple of days ago, we're at 33% approval rating. And so, with that said, under your leadership, we asked U.S. voters, how likely is it that there will be a Black Swan event in 2024? 63% said very or somewhat likely. Only 20% said not likely. And it was across the board. Democrats 59, Republicans 67, Independents 63. But then we asked, what likely is to be that Black Swan event? 36% said an economic depression, followed by 21% who said a cyber attack on the energy grid or banking. 20% said a terrorist attack on U.S. soil. 18% said World War III. And then there were other results as well. If we have a Black Swan event, do we have a crisis in leadership? How could this impact the election? But talk to me. Anyway, just tell me your thoughts. That's my intro.
Yeah, well, so we had the Black Swan event in 2020. Nobody saw that coming, but then maybe in hindsight, and that's the nature of a Black Swan. In hindsight, people said, "Well, we should have known." And so, since COVID, and a lot happened during COVID, there were a lot of crises packed within COVID, socially, culturally, economically. I think that imprint has stayed with us. I mean, remember, since COVID, the outbreak of the war in Ukraine had a lot of people on the edge, and thoughts about a wider war with Russia and the United States at some point potentially directly being involved. Of course, the economy. Yeah, I mean, you and I debate about this all the time. The official numbers say one thing, but voters in droves will tell you another. And that's not just Republicans. It's also independents and increasingly Democrats. It's a lot of young people. It's all across the board. So that's something that's looming, is we're on shaky economic grounds. Of course, this outbreak of war between Israel and Hamas is another thing prompting geopolitical instability. Look at what's happening in the Red Sea with the Houthi rebels firing at shipment vessels from Yemen, and more and more major shipping vessels are going to altogether skip the Red Sea. And what does that have on shipments and the markets? Of course, then there's the geopolitical concern of Israel maybe confronting Iran, who knows, or just a wider Middle East war, which always has to call into question what happens to the Strait of Hormuz or the Red Sea. But it doesn't end there. I mean, more and more talk in the news of cyber attacks, weather-related events. And so it looks to be that the mood is voters are more and more expecting a Black Swan event. I guess, as a joking question, is it then a Black Swan? That's another discussion.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, but nonetheless, there is an expectation that an event can trigger something wider in terms of a systemic breakdown. Oh, and let's not forget about the banking crisis back in March, where a number of large U.S. banks went under, and there was fear of a run on the banks. So it looks like 2024. Oh, and meanwhile, now we have another election involving Trump. And so what we have is part 3 of which is shaping up to be a franchise movie. And we know that part 1 was ugly. We know that part 2, election 2020, was ugly. And the question is, does part 3 of that movie franchise have to take on a whole new form? And I think it does. I think the intensity going into 2024 is incredible. This is across the board. We're talking about the expectation of a Black Swan event. I'll drill down a little bit more. Among those who said that they think one is very likely to happen next year, 29% of liberals and 29% of conservatives.
Say very likely.
Who say very likely, exactly. So all of which is to say that it looks like the American voters have high anxiety.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That's not usually a good recipe going into an election cycle.
Well, here's a critical point. And in 1929, American vote, or I'm sorry, 1932, with official unemployment at 32%, 50% in America's big cities. Uh, it wasn't just that Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected. Herbert Hoover was overwhelmingly rejected. He had run out of juice. Jimmy Carter, 1980, ran out of juice. But in both instances, Franklin D. Roosevelt became iconic and Ronald Reagan became iconic by injecting a spirit, an infusion of American optimism. All we have to fear is fear itself. You know, Ronald Reagan, the city upon a hill, and that turned around the mood. What do you do when you've got the two leading party candidates, Trump and Biden? 73% of American voters don't want them to run for the presidency. Is there a funk here, genuine malaise here, but little or no hope that the 2024 will be like 1932 and 1980?
Well, that's an interesting comparison, and so the only thing that I could say is the key question is, as voters go into 2024 and they look at their choices. First of all, we have to ask, will Joe Biden even be around? That's
Right.
another discussion. We've had that discussion many times. I don't see how he hangs on throughout the course of 2024. But let's
You
assume
mean
that
politically? Just to be specific here, you're talking politically. You're not talking, uh, you know, dying.
I mean, yeah, politically, like him running as the Democratic choice, the Democratic nominee. So my question is, does it become more about the stakes are too high in terms of um, look, economic confidence is going to be a major driver, right?
Mhm.
And so, who is best positioned? I don't think that Biden thrives in that scenario. I think Trump thrives in that scenario. That's why he dominates. It's he has his core following, but as the poll numbers show, like there's this new poll out in New Hampshire that Nikki Haley has gained ground, but Trump is still ahead, and he's still comfortably ahead. He has a dedicated base, but he also has Republicans and independents who don't like him, but want his presidency because they believe that he represents strong economic confidence. And so, if the stakes are high among voters, particularly in an economic context, I think that's what's going to drive the election. But then we have this whole thing of the third party candidate, independent phenomenon. We've got Kennedy, who's running, who is new. Trump isn't new. He already served in office. You know what you're going to get. So in your comparison to 32 and 1980, Ronald Reagan was new. FDR was new. Trump is coming into this more or less not new, but proven. So where does Kennedy fall into that? But then you have others who are throwing their hat in the race on the third party ticket. Jill Stein, the Libertarian candidate, possibly Joe Manchin, who said if he does throw his hat in, it would be after Super Tuesday. So what we have here is a gigantic moving target. How do you make sense of all of that?
Well, I don't make sense of all of that, but I do worry. This is my possible black swan that I worry about, and that is that unlike 1932 and 1980, the election does not resolve anything. That in fact, last time it was Donald Trump who refused to accept the results of the election. I really worry that neither side is prepared to accept the results of the election. That's how bad things are. That I fear is the black swan event of 2024.
I think we are in strong agreement. I have pointed out numerous times that 2016 was the Democratic version of what 2020 was, the Republican rejection, and that why would the third time around, why would we have a consensus among voters of an accepted winner? If anything, probably more confusion, more distrust. And that is another major backdrop going into this election is trust in institutions,
Yep.
Trust in leadership, trust in both political parties, lack of trust, that is. And so it does look like the end result could be a system-wide breakdown of confidence in the political and election system.
So is this where we say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everybody?
It is. It is. But as you've suggested, America has been through this a number of times. These fourth turning events, that there have been four, and we're still here. So at that won't stop Christmas feasting and New Year's Eve partying.
No, it won't. And we'll be back after the first of the year, and we'll be interpreting ours and others' polling. Okay. Take care.
Yep. You too. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.